Gopi Janaballabha Girivardhari Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janaballabha Girivardhari Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yasodan Yamunatira Vanachari Jama Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Om Vishnupada Paramahans Maharaj ISKCON also the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Namacharya Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sagaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Gaur Bhaktivedanta Ki Jai Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopida Shama Kunda Radha Kudda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Ki Jai Navadip Dham Ki Jai Ganga Shamona Tulsi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Go Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru Chi Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Where's the book? Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Śrīmate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswata Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasri Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Reading from Śrīmad Bhāgavatam 5, chapter 10, verse 1. Shri Sukha Uvacha Ata Sindhu Sauvira Pate Rahuganasya Vrajata Ikshumatya Tate Tatkula Patina Shibi Vaha Purush Anveshana Samaye Daivena Upasadita sa dvijavara upalabda Esha piba yuva samhan ananga go karavat dudam vadum alam iti purva vishtigrihitai saha grihita prasabam attad arta uvaha shibikam sa mahanubhavaha. Translation, Sukadeva Goswami continued, my dear king, after this, King Rahugana, ruler of the states known as Sindhu and Sauvira, was going to Kapil-ashrama. When the king's chief palanquin carriers reached the banks of the river Ikshumati, they needed another carrier. Therefore, they began searching for someone, and by chance they came upon Jada Bharata. They considered the fact that Jada Bharata was very young and strong and had firm limbs. Like cows and asses, he was quite fit to carry loads. Thinking in this way, although the great soul Jada Bharata was unfit for such work, they nonetheless unhesitatingly forced him to carry the palanquin. Text 2. The palanquin, however, was very erratically carried by Jada Bharata due to his sense of non-violence. As he stepped forward, he checked before him every 3 feet to see whether he was about to step on ants. Consequently, he could not keep pace with the other carriers. Due to this, the palanquin was shaking. And King Rahugana immediately asked the carriers, "Why are you carrying this palanquin unevenly? I better carry it properly." Purport: although Jada Bharata was forced to carry the palanquin, he did not give up his sympathetic feelings towards the poor ants passing on the road. A devotee of the Lord does not forget his devotional service and other favorable activities, even when he is in the most distressful condition. And Jada Bharata was a qualified brahmana, highly elevated in spiritual knowledge, yet he was forced to carry the palanquin. He did not mind this. But while walking on the road, he could not forget his duty to avoid killing even an ant. A Vaishnava is never envious or unnecessarily violent. There were many ants on the path, but Jada Bharata took care by looking ahead 3 feet. When the ants were no longer in his way, he would place his foot on the ground. A Vaishnava is always very kind at heart to all living entities. In his Sankhya Yoga, Lord Kapila Dev explains, whose suhrida sarva dehinam, living entities assume different bodily forms. Those who are not Vaishnavas considered only human society worthy of their sympathy, but Krishna claims to be the Supreme Father of all living forms. Consequently, the Vaishnava takes care not to annihilate untimely or unnecessarily any life form. All living entities have to fulfill a certain duration for being engaged in a particular type of material body. They have to finish the duration allotted a particular body before being promoted or evolved to another body. Killing an animal or any other living being simply places an impediment in the way of his completing his term of imprisonment in a certain body. One must therefore not kill bodies for one's sense gratification, for this will implicate one in sinful activity. Jada Bharata was rescued by Kali herself from being killed by the dacoits. And now we see somehow or other he ended up walking around the road, and then King Rahugana's men found him, and they needed someone to carry the king's palanquin, so they forced him to carry it. And as explained in these verses, he was very strong, young, and in that sense suitable. But because he was an exalted devotee, and of course he was born in a Brahmin family, he shouldn't have been doing this menial service, serving the king by carrying his palanquin. Nevertheless, he was doing that, and he did not do it properly, not because he wasn't strong, but because he was looking to see that he did not step on any ants. So this was his quality of nonviolence, as Srila Prabhupada has mentioned in the purport. We see another case of that in the case of Mergari the hunter. So Mergari the hunter, to begin with, was just the opposite. He liked to kill things. He liked to kill the animals, or he liked to half-kill the animals and watch them die. So he was a very cruel person. And Narada Muni was horrified when he saw these half-dead animals with arrows in them who had not been really killed. So he wondered who was doing this. They're half-killing the animal, and then they don't bother to kill the animal at all. So he was very disturbed by this. And then he saw this Mergari the hunter there, and then he asked him, "Did you do this?" And Mergari the hunter said, "Yes, and I'm a hunter, and this is my livelihood, etc." But Narada Muni chastised him. And the favorable point of the hunter was he offered respects to Narada Muni when he saw him. He understood this is a great person somehow or other. And that was his act of that invoked the mercy of Narada Muni. So Narada Muni started to instruct him, just as we see here, Jada Bharata begins to instruct King Rahugana. Even both were unqualified in one sense, but Narada Muni instructed him, and he said, "You have to give up this occupation completely, and you just sit down and chant the holy name with your wife. And don't worry about your maintenance." So Mergari the hunter, he followed the words of Narada Muni, surprisingly. He had faith in the words of Narada Muni, and he followed those words. And when Narada Muni returned 3 months later, the hunter was very, very excited to see him, and he was bowing down on the pathway. But when he was on the pathway and he saw the ants, then he would brush away the ants before he offered his obeisances. And so Prabhupada, when he was very, very surprised, and he said, how this person in 3 months has changed completely. First he was killing animals, not just ants, but he was killing, how do you develop animals and half killing them and watching them die. Now he is compassionate even to the ants, and he's brushing them aside so he doesn't kill them or harm them in any way. So this is very surprising. And Narada Muni said, not so surprising, because this is the power of the holy name. Of course, it was also the power of Narada Muni, because in 3 months, generally, you don't develop to that high level. But he had developed like that. So brushing away ants is not the ultimate quality of bhava and prema. It is a secondary aspect. But from that, we can also understand that the person must be quite advanced. So the real characteristic is surrender to the Lord. That's the main characteristic of the devotee. But then he has all these qualities which are like ornaments that manifest in him. So this compassion for all living entities and is one of those particular qualities. And of course we say it manifests at that stage, but even before then it should manifest to some degree. And in fact, we have our own principles, 4 regular principles. When you start bhakti seriously, then you have to stop killing animals and stop eating meat, etc. So we put that principle of non-violence near the very beginning of bhakti. Of course, at the very beginning, they may not be doing this because they may be, just not so serious and eating meat or committing violence, and they can still chant the holy name. But anyone who is serious has to do that. So, a serious practitioner of bhakti must give respect to all living entities. And this is exemplified, as I mentioned the other day, in the Nectar Devotion, the preliminaries to bhakti, 20 angas of bhakti, which are the preliminaries or the door to bhakti, so that you can chant or worship the deity. One of those is you respect the living entities like the trees, the asvata, and the cow, and whatever, the brahmana, etc. Not just Vaishnavas, but all living entities. And then another, later on, the negative qualities. Among the negative qualities, do not disturb any prani, any living entity, whether it's plant or animal. You don't disturb them unnecessarily. So there's another rule. And these are preliminary to actually chanting and hearing and all these other processes. So from that we see that it's a very preliminary activity, this compassion for all living entities. If we examine closer, we will see that if we have faith, then we understand our position in relation to the Supreme Lord, and that is, we are eternally Krishna Dasa. But that doesn't mean only us. That means all living entities are Krishna Dasa. So it's not that I'm the only one who's serving Krishna, so we don't isolate ourselves when we think of ourselves as being the servant of the Lord. We see all living entities as servants of the Supreme Lord. And if we don't, then we cannot practice bhakti properly. If we say, I'm a servant of the Lord, nobody else is a servant, it doesn't matter what we do with those other people, it doesn't work. So this idea that we're servants of the Lord is not just me, it's everybody. And that is part of the attitude we have in performing devotional service. So for ourselves, we engage in devotional service. Other living entities may not engage in devotional service. They may not be qualified. They may be plants or animals or whatever. And as human beings, we don't preach to the faithless people, so we can't really engage them directly. But nevertheless, the devotee is compassionate to all these living entities, and somehow our compassion is manifested in preaching, somehow or other, either directly to those who have faith or indirectly for those who don't have faith. So the way we preach to the faithless people is we expose them to the holy name. Let them hear it, at least. So that's why we go out on kirtan on the street. Let them hear it. If they don't participate, at least they hear it, and that's good for them. So that's how we preach to the people who may be hostile or neutral or whatever. Let them hear kirtan. So that's a way of distributing mercy to living entities. And it's not just the human beings that benefit. Haridas Thakur used to loudly chant. And people would sometimes criticize the Smartas and other people of Brahmins of Navadvip. Why is he making so much noise all the time? Why don't you just sit and meditate like a yogi or something peaceful? He's screaming in the middle of the night and chanting. What is the point of that? One, of course, is that the devotee is very enthusiastic to glorify the Lord, so he likes to do that as loud as possible. But the other thing, of course, so it's good for himself, and it's pleasing to Krishna. Other is that other living entities get benefit, animals and plants. In other words, they get a gata sukriti from that, even though they're not human beings. And they don't have any qualification in one sense. Simply by that vibration of the holy name, they do get some benefit from that also. So this is a type of preaching also. We're preaching to the animals and plants and whatever when we chant the holy name. So this is also a form of compassion to all living entities. So that's why the holy name Nam Sankirtan is so powerful, because we get the effect, because we get to hear and remember and chant together. It's very, very good. And so we advance in devotional service, but everyone who hears, the human beings, plus the animals, plus the plants, they all get benefit from that. So and that's pleasing to Krishna also. So therefore, very, very powerful process. That's a way in which the devotees show their compassion for all living entities by letting all the living entities hear the name of the Lord. So that is, we can say, constitutional to the process of bhakti itself, that this idea of compassion and mercy and respecting all living entities is there. And therefore, in the third verse of Shashastaka, there he says that we respect all living entities, manada, we give respect. And it's not just to Vaishnavas, it's to all living entities we give respect. Just as the tree is tolerant of all conditions and whatever, and the grass is tolerant of being stepped on or whatever. So the devotee of the Lord gives respect to all living entities, whoever they are. And therefore, not just killing, but disturbing in any way is not considered proper. Unfortunately, just to live and maintain your body, you have to disturb somebody in the material world. So even if you're vegetarian, then you have to at least eat plants. So it's minimizing the disturbance, but nevertheless there's still some disturbance. So it's not ideal. So you can be vegetarian and vegan and whatever, still it's not ideal, because you're still, what about the plants? You're committing violence against the plants, if not the animals or the cow or whatever, then it's still the plants you're committing violence. So the very nature of life is that it's a little disturbance to other creatures. As Bhagavatam says, the one jiva is food for another jiva. So that's how we survive in the material world with the body. And as long as we have a body, we can use that for advancing in spiritual life, or we can use it for sense gratification. If we use it for sense gratification, then all of our activities that we do disturb other living entities is called sin. Everything is a sin. So even the plants that you eat are sin. What to speak of the animals and every other act and killing and lying, all this is sin because it's disturbing other living entities. Similarly, exploiting the earth and exploiting the natural resources is all sinful if we're not devotees. So, as I said, it's very difficult to survive in this world at all and be non-violent, because by our nature of living, then we have to interact with the world and disturb it. So, the scriptures say that, yes, you can, to some degree, you can harm other living entities to the extent you have to live. So then there's permissible limits. So we don't have to stop eating, but we eat with minimum of violence. So at the top, that is, no more meat at all. And at the bottom it is, you eat the meat, but you eat in a restricted way. So therefore, there is sacrifice of the goat to Kali for that. Okay, you want to eat meat, then you eat. But you can't eat all meat. You have to go through this whole process of offering to Kali and chanting mantras, etc. Then you eat that meat, or sacrificial meat or whatever. Somehow, there's some restriction there. And as we go higher through the gunas and through the varnas, and then we get to the brahmana, then the brahmana should not eat the meat at all. Similarly, should not eat all these other things like intoxicants and whatever. So the violence gets minimized as we go higher and higher as a human being, and we get to sattva gun. So the person in sattva gun controls the senses more, then he gets more rules for restrictions, because he can follow those restrictions nicely. So this minimizes the violence, doesn't remove the violence. The brahmana has to eat rice or whatever he has to eat, but it's minimal. So that is permissible. to some degree. And then another thing is that if you're going to eat the food, then you offer it to the Lord. Then it's completely free of sin. It's not just minimized, it's free of sin. And not only that, it destroys sin. So bhakti destroys sin, kleshagni. It destroys suffering, karma, everything. So by taking prasadam, we destroy sin. We don't create, we don't minimize, but rather we destroy sin. So that's the advantage of taking prasadam. Similarly, even though there's other ways in which we interact with the world, like walking on the ground, then you may step on an ant, also going down the street or driving a car or whatever, you're squishing the insects or whatever. Because the devotee is engaged in devotional service, then, again, exemption. And Krishna says, Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayasami. I free you from all sins. So normally in the varnashram system, they say, oh, well, look, we're killing these animals and we're stepping on them and we light a fire and we kill a bug. We drink some water, we're killing an animal or germ or whatever like that. So what do? So then they do panchamahayagas every day to get prayaschitta for their atonement for their little accidental sins every day. But the devotee doesn't have to do that because the atonement is bhakti itself. So that atones for everything. It's the highest atonement. So just by doing devotional service, then that takes care of all of the little sins that we're not even conscious of doing all day long. And then for the other sins, of course, then we follow as much as possible all of these rules, like in varnashram system, don't lie, don't cheat, etc. And welcome guests in your house, do charity works, etc. So these are the other things, then, like karma kanda and varnashram too. Regulate us and help us control our sinful propensities and encourage us to do the opposite, that is, charities, which is an aspect of compassion. But then when we come to the devotee, then what is compassion? We're less interested in the compassion of charities of serving the body. Rather, we want to do something devotional. So then we do preaching work or distribute prasadam. And this is something which is spiritual. So in this world, it is impossible to be completely compassionate and non-violent, but we minimize it, and then we transform it through the process of bhakti yoga. And then we're free from all of this contamination of the material world. If we give up the body and we go to the spiritual world, then we're free completely. No more dependence on material body, no dependence on food, so there's no concept of having to depend on, killing or harming other living entities in order to survive. The spiritual world, you have a spiritual body, it doesn't depend on food. It just simply depends on Krishna prema, so it's completely different. So as long as in the material world, yes, we have this problem. As the devotee advances, then he's less attracted to the material world. That's completely, I'm not the body, he's convinced of that. So he's not interested in sense gratification, etc. And so when he gets to bhava and prema, then he's really minimized his needs. And we see that in the case of the Goswamis, where they're simply sitting in Vrindavan with very simple clothing and sitting under a tree and taking minimum of food, etc. like that. Not because they're trying to show off austerity, but simply because they're so absorbed in the Lord that they don't want to bother with the material body at all. So in that case, their interaction with material energy is minimized, but it's not completely, destroyed, minimized. And behind that, we see with the Uttama-adhikari, one who is fixed in prema, not only is he not inimical to any living entity, rather the opposite, he sees that everybody has prema. And he sees everything in terms of prema. So even for the asuras and the demons and whatever, he sees them as being full of prema for the Lord. So his vision is one that everything in the material world is cooperating with the Supreme Lord in the highest level of prema. So there's no concept of hostility towards any living entity at all. It's natural, they're all devotees of the Lord. So that's a very high stage. So when we're on the lower level, sadhana, we cannot imitate those activities of a person on prema. But nevertheless, as I said, we do have to, from the very beginning, we do have to have this idea of nonviolence and compassion for all living entities and giving respect to all living entities from the very beginning of bhakti. If we don't have it, then the bhakti is not real bhakti. So it is a part of bhakti. But on the other hand, we shouldn't think that's everything and it's independent of bhakti. Then it becomes material charity, material compassion. So we balance out the whole idea here. So Jada Bharata was very advanced, and consequently he showed all the side qualities, secondary qualities that a devotee is expected to manifest. And one of these was this not trying to interfere with any living entities, so he wouldn't step on the ants at all. And this took precedence over his duty to the king of carrying the palanquin nicely. He was thinking, I've got to be compassionate to everyone. Of course, he accepted the burden of carrying. Of course, he was forced to do it, but he didn't mind that also, just as he didn't mind being captured by the dacoits and sacrificed to Kali. He didn't protest it. So he didn't protest when they got him and they had him carrying the palanquin, but he was thinking of the ants when he was doing his work, so therefore he couldn't really do that work very properly, and thus the king complained. And then this committed some aparadha on his part, the king complaining, criticizing Jada Bharata. But as we see, again, Jada Bharata showed a remarkable quality. Generally, if people commit aparadhas, then they have no chance of progressing. And if they commit aparadha against a devotee, the devotee usually is not going to be very merciful to them. They may be indifferent to them. But here we see that Jada Bharata was very merciful to King Rahugana, though King Rahugana was an offender. And he began to give him teachings, when he gave no one teachings in his life before that. He never spoke to anyone, and no one had a clue that he had any spiritual inclination or realization. But then when he did speak, he came from the very highest platform, and we can understand that he was very, very elevated. And therefore in this, that verse says, it's not there. It's not complete there. Anyway, the last word is Maha-anubhava. It's a greatly realized soul, great soul. And that we'll see later on when he begins to speak that his words are very, very powerful. And though they were exalted words and powerful words, they also had an effect on the king. The king began to understand that he was a fool. He began to respect Jada Bharata as a great soul. So not only did he preach, but he preached in such a way that he could affect the mind and the heart of this king. We see even in sadhana bhakti, we have an Uttama-adhikari in faith, and that is such a person who has thorough knowledge of the scripture and can understand it very logically, and has very, very deep faith. And so when he speaks it, he can convince people. But that's on a lower level, on the level of Jada Bharata, we don't have to think he had to study all the scriptures like that, because basically he was completely rejecting everything. He didn't want to study. He didn't want to be a Brahmin, didn't take any instruction from his father. But he had the knowledge, he had the realization on a very high level. And therefore he could speak very effectively and convincingly and penetrate the heart of King Rahugana and have him give up his faults and become very respectful to Jada Bharata. Yeah. Okay, any question there? was that?
Repeat your question, please.
Maharaj, like in the text, it said that the soldiers unhesitatingly asked Jada Bharata to carry the palanquin.
Yeah.
So, didn't they learn from the light from Jada Bharata's body that he was a great devotee?
Oh, because they asked him to carry it? They didn't. Well, the people who were looking for a person to carry the palanquin were looking for someone very nice and strong, because that's basically the quality. They weren't looking for a devotee. And Jada Bharata, though he was a great devotee, was somewhat covered. As we see previously, the dacoits also, they said, oh, here's a man-animal. And it's something like a real low person because he can't speak, he can't do anything, so we'll sacrifice him. So they didn't recognize that he was on prema level either. So similarly, these persons here, the people carrying the palanquin, they got him, but they couldn't realize his great nature, so that's why they engaged him in that way. People who are covered over with material energy cannot recognize the great devotee, even if the devotee is not hiding. In this case, Jada Bharata was also hiding. He didn't want anybody to know who he was, because he didn't want to get disturbed. But then, of course, when he was about to be sacrificed to Kali, then, of course, he did manifest some effulgence, which even broke the Kali Murti open, and she came out like that. So, so it's involuntary, more or less. But nevertheless, generally, he hid his qualities so that normal people couldn't understand who he was, as Sukadeva Goswami also did.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Maharaj, you mentioned that the spiritual body is maintained by prema. Two questions. Reference, and do you think Srila Prabhupada was maintained by prema?
So what is okay? Obviously, if we have a spiritual body in the spiritual world, we got nothing to do with the material world. So therefore, in the material world, we eat in order to maintain the body. If we don't eat, then we die and whatever. Spiritual world, like even in Upanishads, they say there is no hunger, no thirst, etc. So we're not dependent upon the material organs or anything and that to maintain ourselves in the spiritual world. Nevertheless, why do we get a body in the spiritual world at all? If you go to Brahman, there is no spiritual body. You're just kind of merged in Brahman and it's all formless. So the formation of that spiritual body in itself is a result of bhakti. And if you do bhakti, gradually that form begins to manifest, and of course it manifests nicely in prema, because we want to serve the Lord. So because of our prema, then we could say the body results. Another way of looking at it is that when you get to bhava stage, there the definition given by Rupa Goswami is this, it's a visuddha sattva visheshatma. He says it's what manifests in bhava stage. And then commentary on Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath is that this Suddha Sattva Visheshatma means Sandini and Hladini, Shakti of the Lord. They manifest in the Jiva at that point, and this produces this bhava and prema. And along with that, what happens is you get the spiritual body. How can you experience prema, and how can you serve Krishna unless you got a body? So then you need some eyes to see Krishna. You need some hands and feet to serve Krishna. So then a body develops. We could say through the Sandini Shakti in the spiritual world, the body manifests, and the qualities in that body manifest. And through the samvit, we get our awareness in using our senses. When we look at Krishna with our senses, we can see him. And then Hladini manifests when you see Krishna, then you start experiencing bliss because you understand the beauty of his form. So all these things manifest as you go through bhava and prema. So the spiritual body in the spiritual world is therefore, we can say, dependent upon the manifestation of the prema, and then consequently involving the different shaktis there to manifest that body. Now, they do eat in the spiritual world. We see Krishna going out and he's eating. In fact, every morning Mother Yasoda and Rohini, they cook nice breakfast for Krishna and he goes out. Then when he's in the fields, he's eating. His mother's packs him a little lunch and he eats it, curd rice and things like this. And when he comes in the evening, then it's a big meal again at the house, and Nanda Maharaj is there, and everybody eats together. So he is eating. But this is again an interaction of prema, and it increases the prema. Mother Yasoda cooks, and that's her anubhava, her expression of her love, and then she feeds Krishna, and then Krishna eats because Mother Yasoda's food, so therefore he's, out of great love for Mother Yasoda, he eats all the food and everything. So when he's eating, actually, it's not like material food, the nourishment is the prema. It's just as when Krishna takes Mother Yasoda's milk, what is it? It's prema. It is not like material milk. So he's nourished by Mother Yasoda's prema. And then Krishna's love increases because of affection of Mother Yasoda and what she does and how she feeds him.
Maharaj, when an animal dies or a living entity dies untimely, is it predestined, or is it coming in the way of its duration to be fulfilled?
Well, generally we take it as it's not predestined. It's something, and when we interfere with it, then definitely it is, it's the bad karma of the animal that I had to kill him and eat him. You can't say that. So in that sense, no. We can't take advantage of the law of karma just to justify any act of violence we do with other living entities. So the karma to suffer, therefore I'll kill them or hit them or whatever. And the same for even human beings. We can't say the same thing. Of course, the animals themselves do suffer karma because they're given a certain body because of previous karmas, but those karmas were earned as a human being. So they're wearing off their karmas and not producing karmas at all. And then the karmas they get are those particular bodies. But when they're in that body, they cannot accrue karmas in any way. So there's, of course, a little balance here in lives of human beings. We could say another person harms another living entity, another human being, and then we say, well, it's his karma to get that I hit him, so therefore he's just suffering in that sense. But the human beings' interaction with each other is very complex, and we can't just simply attribute other people's suffering to karma. It's also due to our immediate actions that we get these results also. We can't just blame karma for everything. So as far as human beings are concerned, at least there's that like that. There is an element of free will there, and if we use our free will in the wrong way, then we get very serious results. And we can't say, oh, it's this karma for the animal or whatever, or the human being. Yeah.
But in Bhakti Yoga, the reaction gets taken away. So why did Jada Bharata not put so much emphasis on not stepping on ants? Because he's a very realized personality. He would know that even if he stepped on ants, he's in the even Krishna consciousness. So he's not a reaction.
Yeah. Well. That's so, we commit these accidental things, fine, we don't get any reaction. But as much as possible, if we're conscious of it, then we avoid. So if we know that, oh, there's an ant there, well, it doesn't matter, I'll just step on it because I'm in a hurry then. Yeah? But rather you think, oh no, we try to avoid as much as possible, even though if we do somehow or other harm them, then we're exempted. But as much as possible, we avoid. So similarly, like in Upanishad, it says there that you have your quota, and you take your quota, but not more than your quota. So therefore, we don't take advantage of our position as a human being and do excessive sense gratification, even though it's possible, and then say, well, I'm exempted because I'm a devotee. So we try to restrict ourselves also. So we don't eat too much. We don't do things to excess. Restrict as much as possible.
But this was getting in the way of his duty, because his duty was to serve the king, but he was not doing it properly.
Oh, well, yes. Yes, he wasn't doing his duty properly, but for him, the duty to the king was less important than his spontaneous bhakti and his idea that we shouldn't hurt living entities. That's why. Of course, we can say, well, he disturbed the king. So he's disturbing someone else there, but he wasn't so concerned. He was just thinking of the ants because he saw them all there. What's the question? I couldn't hear. She's repeat it for loudly.
Why did Damodar show the universal form in his mouth when he was just taking the chastisement? Oh, Mother Yashoda, when she chastised him.
Oh, when she looked in his mouth to see the dirt.
Yeah, when she chastised him, why did you eat the dirt?
Yeah.
Why did he have to show the universal form? Why did he not just take the chastisement?
Why didn't he just take the chastisement? Well, it's explained that he was a little puzzled also because, Balaram and others were kind of accusing him. He ate the dirt, and he said, no, I didn't. And then Mother Yashoda was a little skeptical. Well, we know that Krishna, everyone's complaining he tells lies, so maybe he did eat. And so then she decided, okay, let's open his mouth. And Krishna was thinking, uh-oh, what should I do? If I open my mouth and she sees the dirt, then she's going to punish me. So then what happened was that his Shakti, Aishwarya Shakti, made a big surprise. So he said, okay, I'll open my mouth. And then Aishwarya Shakti showed the universal form inside his mouth. And then Mother Yashoda got astonished and she forgot all about the dirt. So we can say that this was an arrangement of the Shaktis of the Lord to act spontaneously, to create pastimes for Krishna and Mother Yashoda, etc.
Maharaj, as Jada Bharata, you were telling about the duty to the king and giving respect to the ant. Mm-hmm. It apparently looks like there is some kind of discrimination in giving respect to people and different. Is it? And also, so you can explain on that whether we have to discriminate on respect. And on other thing is you were explaining about the Shishtastakam verse. That giving respect to all, and the other part of is expecting no respect for oneself.
Yeah.
So can you explain on that as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, as far as the respect to animals and human beings, generally we give preference to the higher. So if there's a matter of choice between respecting one or the other, then we should respect the higher living entity. But then there's a little complication there because higher living entities like human beings also, they got... there's so much fault in them that we can blame them for different things. So if the king is proud or whatever, or he's a demon or whatever, then we may not be so inclined to show him respect as an animal who is kind of neutral because they have no sin. They have, of course, the karma from previous lifetimes, but as an animal, they're not committing any sin, so we can't say the animal is bad. He's a wicked demon animal or whatever like that. So there's that consideration also. But the other consideration is we cannot predict the prema bhakta and how he'll respond to any situation. It's quite unique, every situation. So we can't really predict that, and that's exactly what Rupa Goswami says in describing the activities of the prema bhakti and nectar devotion. We cannot describe it because whatever you say he should do this or act like that, he may not act like that. He may do the opposite. Completely unpredictable. He may show respect in this way one time and respect a different way in another time. It's unpredictable. It's just on such a high level. So we can say it's a play of his free will and the will of the Supreme Lord. Between that, they do something, and we cannot predict what that's going to be. As far as the not expecting respect and giving respect to all living entities, these two things go together. Not wanting respect is very essential. We see even at the end of Hare Bhakti Vilas, there near the end, the last few slokas, and then he says, above all, beware of pratishta, the desire for position and respect. You have to get the respect of others. This is just like a very great enemy of devotional service. And of course, we'll look in when Bhaktivedanta Thakur analyzes the anartas, consisting of hridaya dorbalyam, which means weakness of heart there. Then pratishta is one of those also, along with kutinati and matsarya. Kutinati is that duplicity, and pratishta is desire for a position. So this is contaminating to the heart, the weakness of the heart. So this is an anarta. These are unfavorable, we can say. And then the opposite, of course, is we give respect to all living entities. So if we desire respect, then it's very difficult to give respect, isn't it? We're doing the opposite. We're trying to get all the respect for ourselves, so how we can respect all of the entities. So the devotee's opposite. He thinks he's a servant of the servant of the servant, Nitya Krishna Das, so therefore he takes everyone as in a higher position. So therefore he's naturally humble as a part of bhakti itself.
Maharaj, so we heard in the yesterday's lecture about Jeev Daya and Nam Ruchi, and we also heard today that when an exalted devotee speaks, then it touches the heart of the common people, and we also see that in our life that that we think that doing preaching activity or that seems like we can convince ourselves, okay, if I'm doing that, that's good enough. I'm doing the best. I'm doing right. So sometimes we see others, they are in mode of they look very passionate in that activity, but so the question is that preaching kind of mood, how it should be in a balanced state, like
Well, different people probably have different personalities, so their preaching may take different forms also. So some people run out and just do kirtan all day long in the street, jumping up and down. That's their way of doing it. Other people may explain things very shastrically to people, or in a way that they can appreciate whatever. Others may take a more indirect approach and go gradually, whatever. So according to the propensity of the individual, some may just distribute books, whatever. So it's up to the individual which mode he wants to preach in. In any case, we're trying to distribute mercy to fallen jivas, and we do have to act in such a way that to make them favorable somehow or other, that's all. And of course there's different ways of doing that. And of course it's also different for different people, how they're going to respond, so we have to choose the proper way to preach to different types of people. Okay. Hare Krishna.